Certainly. The opening scene of The Voices Beneath the Floor is a masterful exercise in slow-building dread, setting the tone for a psychological and supernatural horror story. Rather than relying on sudden shocks or graphic imagery, the scene unfolds with an unsettling subtlety, drawing the reader into the protagonist's growing unease. The story begins with the protagonist, a man living alone in an old, possibly neglected house, noticing something off. At first, the sounds are easy to dismiss, faint, muffled murmurs beneath the floorboards that could be mistaken for the natural groans of an aging structure or even the echoes of distant neighbors. But there's an unnatural quality to them, a rhythm that suggests speech rather than random noise. The protagonist tries to rationalize it, a common human reaction to the inexplicable, but the persistence of the sounds gnaws at him. What makes this opening so effective is its escalation in small, insidious steps. The voices don't immediately scream or threaten. Instead, they grow clearer over time, as if whatever is producing them is becoming more confident, more aware of being heard. Laughter, whispers, fragments of conversation, none of it distinct enough to decipher, yet undeniably present. The horror lies in the ambiguity. Is this a hallucination, a haunting, or something worse? The scene also establishes isolation as a key element of terror. The protagonist is alone, with no one to confirm or deny his experience, which makes his uncertainty all the more unsettling. The house itself becomes a character, its creaking floors and hidden spaces serving as a prison of the mind, even before any true supernatural threat is confirmed. By the end of the opening, the reader is left with a creeping sense that something is wrong, but like the protagonist, they can't yet define it. This slow unraveling of reality is a hallmark of psychological horror, making the eventual plunge into full-blown terror all the more impactful. The scene doesn't just set up the story, it primes the reader's imagination to fill the gaps with their own fears, which is where the truest horror often lies. The opening of The Voices Beneath the Floor is a masterclass in atmospheric horror, weaving together psychological unease, environmental dread, and the slow erosion of rationality. Unlike more overt horror tales that rely on immediate shocks, this story unfolds with a quiet, creeping terror, one that lingers in the periphery before tightening its grip. The scene begins mundanely, grounding the reader in the protagonist's everyday world. He is alone in an old house, a setting that feels familiar, even mundane, until it isn't. The initial sounds beneath the floorboards are subtle, almost dismissible. A faint murmur, a creak that could be the house settling, a whisper that might be the wind. This is a classic horror technique, presenting something just slightly off in an otherwise normal environment. The protagonist's first reaction is rationalization, a defense mechanism that makes his eventual terror more relatable. As the scene progresses, the noises evolve. What started as ambiguous rustlings become unmistakably voices, whispers that seem to carry fragments of speech, laughter that has no source, muffled conversations that stop the moment he strains to listen. The horror here is in the uncertainty. Are these sounds supernatural, or is the protagonist losing his grip on reality? The story plays with this ambiguity, forcing both the character and the reader to question what's real. The use of sound as a horror device is particularly effective. Unlike visual horrors, a ghost, a monster, voices are intangible. They can't be confronted or escaped. They invade the protagonist's mind, making him hyper-aware of his own isolation. The fact that he can't decipher the words only heightens the dread. The human brain instinctively seeks patterns, and the inability to understand these sounds makes them feel wrong, even predatory. The setting itself becomes a character in this opening. The house is old, its floorboards worn, its structure full of hidden spaces, perfect for something to lurk unseen. Every creak and groan takes on new meaning, transforming the environment from a shelter into a prison. The protagonist's growing fixation on the sounds mirrors the reader's own tension. The more he listens, the more the house seems to listen back. A key strength of this scene is its refusal to confirm whether the threat is internal, madness, or external, a haunting. The protagonist's reactions, hesitation, fear, reluctant curiosity, mirror what the reader might feel. His attempts to dismiss the sounds, "It's just the pipes, just the wind," feel like a desperate mantra, a way to stave off panic. But the persistence of the voices undermines his rationality, planting the seeds for the full-blown terror to come. By the end, the reader is left with an unresolved tension. The voices are real enough to disturb, but not yet defined enough to explain. This deliberate ambiguity is what makes the horror so effective. It taps into the primal fear of what we cannot see or understand. The floorboards, once just part of the house, now feel like a thin barrier between the protagonist and something unspeakable. The second act of The Voices Beneath the Floor plunges the protagonist and the reader into a harrowing descent from skepticism into inescapable dread. This is no longer about fleeting, dismissible noises. It becomes a methodical, almost obsessive quest for answers that only deepens the horror. Where the opening scene teased uncertainty, the investigation scene weaponizes it, transforming curiosity into a trap. At first, the protagonist approaches the mystery with a semblance of control. He tells himself there must be a logical explanation, an animal in the walls, faulty wiring, even neighbors' voices carrying through some odd acoustic flaw. His decision to investigate is initially pragmatic. He checks the crawl space, inspects the floorboards, listens intently for patterns. This is a man clinging to reason, a defense mechanism against the unthinkable. But the house offers no solace, only silence where there should be evidence, and whispers where there should be none. In a modern twist on classic haunting tropes, the protagonist turns to technology to validate his experience. He sets up recordings, replaying them late at night like a scientist analyzing an anomaly. The horror doesn't come from what he finds, but from what the recordings confirm. The voices are undeniably real, and they're in his house. Worse, they sometimes speak in languages he doesn't recognize, guttural, ancient, or perhaps inhuman. This moment shatters any remaining pretense of rationality. Technology, often a tool for demystifying the unknown, instead becomes an accomplice to the terror, proving that the phenomena are beyond his understanding. The physical investigation of the house's underbelly is a masterstroke of claustrophobic horror. The crawl space is dark, cramped, and thick with the smell of damp earth, an almost womb-like antithesis of safety. As he peers into the darkness with a flashlight, the beam catches nothing but dust and cobwebs, yet the air feels wrong. The absence of visual evidence is more unsettling than any ghastly sight. The mind races to fill the void. And then, a sound, a whisper, not from the recording, but right beside him in the dark. The scene weaponizes the fear of the unseen, making the protagonist and reader question whether something is hiding just beyond the light's reach, breathing with him in the shadows. The voices no longer murmur indistinctly. They begin to interact. They mimic familiar tones, a deceased loved one's cadence, a childhood lullaby, before twisting into something grotesque. This isn't random noise, it's a performance designed to unsettle, to manipulate. The protagonist's name, spoken in a chorus of strangers' voices, becomes a recurring motif. The horror here is deeply personal, suggesting the entity isn't merely present, but observing him, learning how to dismantle his sanity. By the scene's end, the protagonist's quest for answers has only bred more terror. The recordings can't be unplayed, the crawl space can't be unremembered, and the voices now follow him beyond the floorboards, into his dreams, his waking hours, the very walls. His investigation hasn't solved anything. It's widened the rift between him and the rational world. The reader, too, is trapped in this spiral, realizing alongside him that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only survived. The third act of The Voices Beneath the Floor marks a harrowing turning point, where the story abandons all pretense of ambiguity and launches into full-throated psychological terror. What began as unsettling whispers now transforms into an aggressive, personalized assault on the protagonist's sanity and sense of safety. This is where the haunting stops being a passive phenomenon and becomes an active, predatory force. The scene opens with a chilling development. The voices now know his name. This simple but devastating escalation shifts the horror from general to intensely personal. No longer are these random, disembodied sounds. They've become a direct address, a recognition that shatters any remaining illusion of detachment. The protagonist isn't just hearing something strange, he's being targeted. The voices employ cruel psychological warfare, mimicking familiar tones and cadences, perhaps calling to him in the voice of a deceased loved one or a childhood friend. This perversion of comforting sounds into instruments of terror is particularly gut-wrenching as it violates the sanctity of memory itself. Sleep paralysis introduces another layer of physiological horror, grounding the supernatural elements in a terrifying but medically recognized phenomenon. The description of shadowy figures at the bedside during these episodes creates unbearable tension. Are these manifestations real or products of his unraveling mind? The genius of this sequence lies in its ambiguity. Even as the horror escalates, the story maintains that crucial sliver of doubt about whether this is supernatural or psychological in origin. The house itself becomes an active participant in the haunting. Floorboards creak with deliberate, purposeful movement, not the random settling of an old structure, but something mimicking footsteps, something testing the boundaries of its confinement. The sounds develop a horrifying physicality, where before they were ethereal whispers, now they carry weight and presence. The protagonist might hear what sounds like fingernails dragging along wood grain, or the unmistakable pressure of something heavy shifting position beneath him. Perhaps most disturbing is the way the voices begin synchronizing with his daily life. A sudden silence when he enters a room, as if something is holding its breath. The faintest echo of his own words bouncing back at him moments later. The growing sense that whatever resides below isn't just aware of him, but studying him, learning his routines, his fears, the rhythm of his breathing at night. This transforms the home from a place of refuge into a hunting ground, where predator and prey occupy the same space, separated only by inches of aging lumber. The psychological toll becomes unbearable. We see the protagonist's rapid deterioration, the sleepless nights, the compulsive checking of locks and floorboards, the way he starts avoiding certain rooms. His reflection in mirrors begins to look hollowed out, a visual representation of how the voices are eating away at him from the inside. The terror is no longer confined to the basement or crawl spaces. It has infected every corner of his existence. What makes this escalation so effective is how it mirrors real-world anxiety disorders while maintaining supernatural plausibility. The protagonist's reactions, the paranoia, the hypervigilance, the compulsive behaviors, are textbook responses to prolonged terror. Yet the story leaves just enough unexplained to maintain that crucial supernatural edge. The voices don't just grow louder, they grow smarter, adapting their torment to maximize his fear. By the scene's end, the haunting has evolved from a curiosity to an inescapable reality. The rules have changed. It's no longer about discovering the source of the voices, but surviving their attention. The floorboards have become a fragile barrier between the protagonist and something unspeakable, and with each passing night, that barrier grows thinner. The story masterfully positions the reader to feel this deterioration alongside the protagonist, creating a shared sense of mounting dread that lingers long after the final page. The fourth act of The Voices Beneath the Floor marks the story's devastating transition from psychological terror to inescapable physical horror, where the unseen finally takes form with bone-chilling consequences. This is the moment when the protagonist's rational world collapses entirely as the haunting sheds its subtlety and begins leaving undeniable marks, both on his home and his flesh. The scene opens with the first irreversible proof that something exists beyond mere sound. Deep gouges appear overnight in the floorboards, not random scratches but deliberate, almost ritualistic patterns that seem to form symbols just beyond comprehension. These marks carry a terrible weight of intention, their very existence mocking the protagonist's previous doubts. The wood splinters inward, as if scored by claws from beneath, suggesting something is testing its strength against the barrier separating their worlds. Then come the marks on his body, thin red lines that sting when touched, appearing mysteriously during the night as if something has been tracing his limbs while he sleeps. The horror here lies in their placement, some on his arms as if gripped too tightly, others curiously on his feet and ankles, suggesting something has been grasping at him from below the bed. These wounds serve as physical confirmation of his torment, yet paradoxically make him appear more insane to any potential outsiders, trapping him in a nightmare of isolation. The auditory hallucinations evolve into full tactile horror. Where before there were only voices, now come sensations. The unmistakable brush of fingers against his own during a midnight investigation, the sickening warmth of breath on his neck when no one stands behind him, the gradual realization that the cold spots in the house aren't random, but seem to move with purpose, following him from room to room like a predator herding its prey. The climax of this physical escalation comes in the scene's most harrowing moment, the appearance of blackened skeletal hands pressing up from between the floorboards, their elongated fingers straining toward him as the wood groans in protest. These hands don't simply appear, they emerge with agonizing slowness, giving the protagonist and reader ample time to comprehend their impossible reality. What makes this manifestation so terrifying is its partial nature. We don't see full entities, just these grasping extremities, leaving the imagination to conjure what horrors might be attached to them. The hands seem to test the air when they emerge, as if learning the dimensions of our world, suggesting an intelligence behind their movements that goes far beyond mere ghostly repetition. The voices now speak with clear, undeniable commands, their tone shifting from whisper to guttural demand. The phrase, "let them in," repeats like a cursed mantra, its meaning horrifically ambiguous. Are they asking for permission or warning of inevitable entry? The protagonist's refusal seems to anger whatever lurks below, resulting in increasingly violent physical reactions. Doors slamming without cause, furniture sliding across rooms, the temperature plummeting until his breath comes in visible clouds. This scene represents the complete inversion of the story's initial premise. Where once there were only questionable sounds, now there is irrefutable evidence. The house no longer feels like a structure haunted by spirits, but rather a thin membrane stretched over some other realm, one that's beginning to tear at the seams. The protagonist's earlier investigations now seem laughably naive. This isn't a mystery to be solved, but an incursion to be survived. By the scene's end, the nature of the haunting has fundamentally changed. The rules have been rewritten. No longer is this about interpreting signs or maintaining doubt. The physical manifestations have made the threat terrifyingly concrete, even as its full nature remains obscured. The floorboards, once symbolic of the barrier between reality and nightmare, have become literal battlegrounds, their nails groaning as something pushes insistently against them from below. The story masterfully uses these physical intrusions to make the horror inescapable, both for the protagonist and the reader. When scratches appear on both house and inhabitant, we understand at a visceral level that there will be no waking from this nightmare. The final act of The Voices Beneath the Floor does not offer resolution. It delivers a devastating, open-ended horror that lingers like a curse. By this point, the protagonist's sanity has unraveled completely, and the boundary between the physical and supernatural has eroded. The story refuses a clean conclusion, instead plunging the reader into an abyss of uncertainty where the true horror lies in what is not explicitly shown. The scene begins with a terrible stillness. The voices, once relentless, have gone quiet. But this silence is not peace. It is the hush before predation. The house itself seems to be holding its breath, the air thick with anticipation. The protagonist, now a shell of his former self, moves through the rooms like a man already dead, his body marked by scratches, his mind broken by sleepless nights and the certainty that something is coming for him. The floorboards, once merely creaky, now bulge unnaturally in places, as if something beneath is pressing up, testing their strength. Then, in the dead of night, the final assault begins. The whispering returns, but it is no longer fragmented. It is a chorus, a cacophony of voices speaking in unison, some familiar, some alien, all chanting the same demand. Let us in. The words vibrate through the walls, the floor, the protagonist's very bones. The house groans in response, its structure straining as unseen forces gather beneath. The protagonist, in his final moments of agency, does the only thing left to him. He kneels, presses his hands to the floor, and listens. The ending is deliberately, agonizingly ambiguous. The story offers two possible fates, neither comforting. In one interpretation, the protagonist is taken, the floor gives way, and skeletal hands drag him screaming into the darkness. His final cries are muffled, as if something is stuffing his mouth with earth. And then, silence. The house stands empty, but the voices remain, quieter now, waiting for the next occupant. The alternative interpretation is even more unsettling. The protagonist joins them. He does not fight as the hands emerge. Instead, he reaches back, his fingers intertwining with theirs as if greeting old friends. His final whisper, "I'm here," suggests not resistance, but surrender. The voices welcome him, and the last thing the reader hears is his laughter, now one among many, bubbling up from beneath the floor. The genius of this ending lies in its refusal to confirm which fate is real. Both possibilities are horrifying in different ways. One, a violent consumption, the other, a willing assimilation. The story's final lines reinforce the idea that the voices were always there, always waiting, and that the protagonist was never truly alone in the house. He was simply the latest in a long line of victims, or perhaps converts. This ambiguity lingers, forcing the reader to carry the horror beyond the final page. The fear is no longer about what is happening, but what could be happening even now in the quiet spaces of their own homes. The floorboards, once just wood and nails, now feel like a fragile barrier between worlds. And the worst question of all remains unanswered. If you listen closely, what do you hear beneath them? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.